welcome back, Pension Task Force, for the afternoon. We have a quick scheduling conversation to have with John here, and then we'll dive back into the possible options.
Okay, so as we discussed in our last meeting, we have to have an initial meeting with Ice Miller, Dan and Eric, and Peter Fagan signed up, and Mike, you were volunteered to be group, and so they are available tomorrow from 10 to 3:30 and all day Friday except from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. So
I can do.
So whatever works for you all.
I'm busy from 10 to 12 tomorrow, so anything after noontime, I'm fine.
I'll have to withdraw my participation. I'm flying tomorrow. I'll just be out of town Thursday and Friday. So
Okay.
that's complete confidence.
All right, so
Here's our invitation
you're
to come
available
along.
Anytime afternoon tomorrow.
anytime afternoon tomorrow? How about Friday?
Friday, what was it, all day?
All day except from 10 to 1.
I've got a meeting from 9 to 10, so anytime after 10 is fine for me.
Okay. So Dan's available from noon tomorrow on, so anytime, and they were 10 to 3:30, so it'd have to be 3:30 tomorrow. No, they're booked from 10 to 3:30. And then on Friday, they're available before 10 or after 1 p.m. And Dan said the afternoon, right? Yep, would work. He's available after 10, so, but after, so afternoon on Friday. Does that work for you, Dan?
On Friday?
Friday at 3 p.m.? Okay, great.
Good. Excellent.
Thank you. All right with you, Dan?
3:45?
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Thank you all. So I think we are on the final page of the possible options. And so I would love for us to go through and identify which of these we might be interested in pursuing. And then Jeanette had suggested that we maybe go back to the beginning and just talk a little bit about what you see here in green, because that is sort of Jeanette's understanding of where we were. Is that right?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that I put in green this document is what I thought we came away with at our last meeting. And I want to just make sure that I understood where we actually were, so that we can make sure that I got it right. Okay. And not to discuss the issues, but just make sure that I understood where we were about them. Okay.
If I may, I have some follow-ups from this morning. In answer to the question about the teacher COLAs, the teachers are the same as the state employees, and actually the municipal employees also, in that they have to be receiving a pension for a full calendar year before they're eligible for COLA. So in the case of teachers retiring July 1st, they would not get a COLA until effectively 18 months later. And I also have the information about, I don't know if you want to talk about this now or I can share it later, is what the current health insurance rates are for teachers who are Medicare eligible today, as well as what their rates will be effective January, as well as what the rates are for people who are not Medicare eligible, meaning they're younger than 65. And I have a sample of some of the plans. We offer different plans, but this will just give you a sense of what the dollars are and what the potential cost savings are associated with those plans and those individuals.
Yeah.
Should we do that now?
Yeah. Why not?
All right, so I'm just gonna just quickly, so for someone who's currently on Medicare, meaning this month, I'm gonna, there's three different, I'm gonna give a number for three different plans. The total premium for the comprehensive plan is 500, I'm gonna round just to dollars. Comprehensive plan is $575. JY plan is $704, and the this 65 is $212, and those plans are different based on their benefits that they provide. So that's the total premium. And then the state share is effectively for most people, for many people is 80%. The employee share, retiree share is 20%. Starting in January, same three plans, the total premium will be $355 compared to $575 now. $363 compared to $704 now, or $80 compared to $212 now. That's what the total premium will be. And then you can just do the math for 80-20 in terms of the state share and retiree share. So that's significant savings. I said this morning it's about 30%. It might be a little more, a little less, depending upon a particular plan. So that's significant savings for the state and for the retiree. For someone under 65, and this gets to the question that was asked this morning about, incentivizing people to stay longer perhaps and have some savings on the insurance side. Right now, the comprehensive plan is $1,046, the total premium, $1,046 a month. The JY plan is $1,174 a month. And we have what's called the VHP plan, which is $1,045 or 46 also. So the total premium is for people under 65 who are not Medicare eligible. Again, there's the 80-20 split on that would apply in that as well. And I can provide this sheet to Gail if you'd like.
That's significant. Thank you.
Will the under 65 change or no? January 1st?
I don't believe so. I think that's the current rate.
Because I think the Advantage plan is just
For the Medicare eligible.
Advantage plan, so it's only for Medicare.
And, and the bulk of our retirees are over age 65. I think we have about, doing this from memory, maybe about 800 plus or minus individuals under 65 on the health insurance plan, but the bulk of people plan are over 65.
Thank you.
That's correct.
Right, but and if they have a disability, then they might be eligible for Medicare. If they have a recognized disability for Medicare purposes.
If they're under 65,
Yeah,
yes, they could be on Social Security disability.
Yeah.
Any other questions, folks, on that? All right. All right, ready to shift to the last page?
Madam Chair, I'm not sure if we covered modify early retirement eligibility on the bottom of the previous, but if you'd like, I can cover that briefly.
Yes, okay,
you're right.
So this, right now, most groups, but not all, are covered by the same sort of early retirement system where I'm starting with increased minimum eligibility age, where the minimum age to qualify for early retirement is age 55 with 5 years of service. The big exception with that is VSERS Group C, the public safety and law enforcement group. They can qualify for early retirement at age 50 with 20 years of service. So increase the minimum eligibility age, that's relatively straightforward. Should those ages be changed from the current 55 for everybody with the exception of Group C, or stay where they are now. And the second bullet point where it says impose actuarial reductions for all groups. Most people in the workforce, this is really about VSERS specifically. So typically whenever you go out for early retirement, the sort of the cost of that, if you will, of being able to leave earlier is you have a reduced benefit. The teacher system, currently there's an actuarial reduction. So the actuaries crunch some numbers and see, what makes this cost neutral, basically. There's a couple exceptions on the state side. Actually, all the plans on the state side look a little bit different. And this chart, it can be a handy reference as well that shows the group by group comparison from the treasurer's office. So with group C, the public safety law enforcement, there's no actuarial reduction. So you can, with 20 years of service, retire at age 50 and basically get 50% of your salary. So you essentially max your benefit then. The group D, there's a 3% reduction per year for every year you retire before age 62. And that works out to roughly a 0.25% per month reduction. Group F, the old Group F, the folks hired before July 1st, 2008, there's a 6% per year reduction from age 62. So that would be 0.5% per month. And then the new Group F for folks hired after July 1st, 2008, their monthly reduction is based on their years of service. So it's tiered. Another key exception to this rule is if you are a Group F member who works for the Department of Corrections or at the Vermont State Hospital, and you have performed those duties for 20 years, you can retire at age 55 with 20 years of service in those roles out a reduction. So that's sort of something that doesn't show up on this chart, but it is a reality with the way Group F is structured. So I think one of the questions here for you all to consider is whether it's worth taking a look at making any changes here, or whether it's to the age or to standardize some of the reductions across all groups to either be all actuarial reductions or some other criteria.
Do you want to speak to this or?
Question.
Yeah, sure.
Chris, you went for the new group F. What did you say the reductions were?
It's all based on your years of service. So I'll read through this. It's helpful to look at this, but if you had 35 or more years of service, which there probably aren't very many people with 35 or more years of service going out on early retirement because they're beyond the cusp of qualifying for normal retirement. 1/8% per month is the reduction. 30 to 34, it's 0.25% per month. 25 to 29 years of service is 1/3 reduction per month. 20 to 24 years of service, it's 5/12%, and less than 20 is 5/9%. I have no idea how these percentages were arrived at.
Okay, that was my real. Thank you.
So you're saying, looking at group D and group F, it is, the 3% is charged before they reach the normal retirement age of 62, right? Well, as it's listed here. So 3% every year on their retirement benefits, unless there's the stuff for, you said which hospital?
The Vermont State Hospital.
Okay.
Yeah, they'd be under group F. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
So can you help those of us who don't have this immediately or need to be imprinted into our brains? Help me understand the magnitude of the changes that we might make in this. If, for instance, we were going to try to level off so that there was an actuarial reduction for all groups.
Sure. So I don't know exactly what percentage of the entire workforce goes out on early retirement. I can tell you that Group C, a very large percentage of their members go on early retirement because there's no reason not to, quite frankly. If you have 50 years old and have 20 years of service, the vast majority of their active members are 50 or under. We would need some actuarial analysis to take a look at that. One area that is worth sort of keeping in mind, though, with this issue of early retirement is it goes back to this question of incentive for people to work longer. So I think you could look at this in terms of imposing an actuarial reduction on everybody, make sure this is a cost neutral practice to the extent these types of things can be cost neutral, in the long term, or whether or not some reduction beyond the cost neutral point might be worth pursuing to try to encourage more people to work until normal retirement rather than go out early. So I think those are fair questions that we would want to get some analysis on if you all decided that you wanted to go down that road. But the vast majority of the liability is likely attributed to normal retirement.
Yeah, I just want to add to that, and this is sort of related to what we were talking about this morning. Also, at lunchtime, I just did a quick count of from last year's valuations, a quick count of the number of people, active employees in both the state and teacher system that are currently have more than 30 years of service. As of the last valuation, there were 880 state employees who had more than 30 years of service. Let's see, there's a fair number that actually had more than 35 years of service. And that's out of an active population of about 8,500. So it's roughly 10% of the active workforce has more than 30 years of service currently. On the teacher side, the number is 866 out of approximately 10,000 active employees. So it's a little less than 10% of the active teacher population. And again, there's looks like about 225 of those people are over 35 years of service. When you're thinking about incentivizing people to work longer, there's a fair number of people who are already have exceeded 30 years of service and are eligible for full retirement.
Did anybody have any comments on what Chris just went through, modifying the early retirement eligibility?
Suggestions, recommendations?
Or did we all have turkey sandwiches for lunch?
I think I said it, sorry.
Go ahead.
I think I said when I was talking about the modified normal retirement, it's a hard no for me as well. Because, well, for obvious reasons, but that I've spoken about before. It's, again, for the current employees, those who, when they started, there was an expectation of you work this, a certain amount of time, you put in the effort and the work. And I just don't support increasing the minimum eligibility for retirement and more, imposing the actuarial reductions for all the groups.
I'm not finding that page, it's single page. Do you remember what date that's from?
This was early on, and this is also available on the treasurer's website for anybody who's following along. It's the plan group comparison chart is what it would say, I believe, group plan comparison chart.
And you actually need to go to each of the respective systems, like the teacher, state, and municipal specific pages, because it just gives the group comparison for that system. It's not combined into one document for all three systems. I believe Gail has posted it on this task force webpage also.
That's what it's supposed to be.
It would have been one of the earlier weeks, yeah.
Link to all of Chris's documents.
Comments or questions or concerns about this one? Why does Group C have no penalty? Was that just something that was, do we know?
I do not.
Do you know that? Or Mike, you know? The question was, the way, if I understood this right, what Chris said is that group C is eligible at age 50 with 20 years, and there's no reduction until, because normal retirement would be 55, and there's no reduction per year. And I just wondered why that was, that group C was singled out here and for no reductions. I think that the 55 was because of some federal, it was a federal, not rule, regulation, laws, whatever it was, but it came down from the federal government. I know we've talked about this over and over and over again about whether people can work group C after the age of 55, and many people do. They just can't work in the troopers, but they would work in municipalities as police officers. So,
I think the age 55 is written in stone in any legal decision. I think there's a legal analysis that has to go on to determine that age.
yeah, there was a suit in
Because, I
Vermont.
mean, I know federal law enforcement, their mandatory retirement age is 57. So it's not,
Right, I think
there's a
that,
legal analysis that has to go on. I mean, I think we dealt with that when we were part of the law enforcement retirement work a couple of years ago.
and there was a suit in Vermont. And
Yes, there
the
was.
person lost the suit and it stayed at 55.
Chris, if you could share the name of the document, I'll post it on today's agenda.
Sure. I think it was the VSERS and VSTRS group plan comparison charts.
So anybody else have any? Want to look at this further or just leave it as it is, or? Where are we with this one?
The only thing I'm going to say is if we're trying to incentivize people to work longer, having a system that makes it just as beneficial for somebody to retire at 50 versus 55 seems, well, it's counter what we're trying to achieve. And so is there a way to incentivize law enforcement officers to work until their mandatory retirement age of 55?
If I could just add, the treasurer ran some numbers on that last year.
Okay,
Yeah, those are in the January 15th report from the treasurer's office.
in the January report. Trevor? All right, anything? We else have?
Shall we move on to AFC? So there are four ideas around average final compensation. And just as a reminder, your average final compensation times your benefit multiplier, which is based on your years of service, those are the key elements to sort of decide what your to calculate what your retirement benefit is. So the different groups have different AFC calculations. So for the teachers, it's all highest 3 consecutive years, excluding all payments for anything other than service actually performed. So they would take those 3 highest consecutive years, average them, and that results in your AFC for benefit calculation purposes. Things work similarly on the state employee side, but with some differences from group to group. So for group C, that's the public safety and law enforcement group, you take a look at the highest 2 consecutive years, and it includes some unused annual leave payoff in the calculation. For Group D, the judges, it's the final salary at retirement. So they do not average any multiple years. It's the final salary at retirement. Group F, it's the highest 3 consecutive years, excluding unused annual leave payoff. So the first bullet here, increase the number of years and apply the number of additional years to all groups, speaks to if all of the current changes group to group stayed where they are, but everybody had an extra year or 2 years added. So it wouldn't make the calculation uniform for everybody, but the additional years would be uniform. So if you were to do that, and the example here is add 2 years to all groups. So that would, Group C would go from looking at the highest 2 consecutive years to the highest 4. Group D would go from final salary at retirement to 2 years. Group F would go from 3 highest consecutive to 5 highest consecutive. The second bullet point, increase number of years and apply the same range to all groups. That example is treat everybody equally. So put everybody in a system where they look at the highest 5 years, for example. So there's not that variation from group to group. The third one, tighten guardrails around number of hours worked. The final years are considered for AFC calculation purposes. Right now on the VSERS side, there's statutory language where in your 3 years that are, or however many years that are under consideration in your AFC, if you have a year where you worked more than 120% of the hours than you did in the other years, anything above that 120% extra is excluded from the calculation. A similar thing exists on the teacher side, but it's not 120% of the hours, it's 10%, I believe, of the compensation. So those types of guardrails are in place to try to mitigate risk that can occur from, it's commonly called spike. But at the end of a career, somebody may seek out more opportunities for overtime or things like that in order to boost their AFC calculation for pension purposes. So putting those guardrails, the intent of that is to try to mitigate any financial risk that can come from your final couple years in employment, really driving your AFC higher than your overall salary history necessarily would suggest. So tightening the guardrails could be excluding some forms of compensation entirely, like overtime, for example, or it could be, instead of saying anything above the 120% of the hours, maybe it's you average and it's 100% of the hours. So there's something a little bit more representative of the overall work history. These things can be difficult to model actuarially, but this I would sort of lump in the risk mitigation strategy bucket.
I think that this, I don't even think there were any actuarial studies done on this at all. This came up a few years ago when there was this completely false understanding that there were all these troopers out there who were spiking their last 3 years. And it turned out that, and so the Troopers Association actually was very helpful in coming to this. And it turned out that there was not widespread practice. It was a couple people that were probably doing it, but it was not widespread. But this was put in to make sure that didn't happen. And and I will say that the troopers were very supportive of putting that in because they felt they were getting a bad rap from a couple people, which is exactly what was happening.
Yeah, and I want to be very, and that's really helpful. I want to be clear that when I use the word spiking, I'm not suggesting that this is something that people are doing out of any ill will. I mean, the reality of government is that you never necessarily know what hours you're going to work at any given time. And in many places, seniority is the driving factor and overtime assignments. So this is just the reality of running any large organization.
Right, and I think that's why the 120 was put in there, acknowledging that it does happen, that it, yeah.
Am I right in understanding that this is sort of at its core an issue of fairness within the fund itself? I mean, if I if my salary towards the end of my career is $70,000, and his salary towards the end of his career is $90,000, but I'm able to spike mine up, you know, doing this added overtime, I will not have been paying into the fund at that 90,000, but I may be able to spike up and get my average final compensation closer to that without me having contributed for the decade of, you know, the last decade of
Yeah,
my career.
you would still be paying the same percentage of your check in terms of employee contributions, whether you made 70 or 90. Obviously, that translates into more money going in at the higher salary because the percentage is consistent. But I think your point is right that not everybody has the same opportunities in their final couple years of employment to increase their salary through a promotional opportunity or through, you know, the opportunity to work extra hours above what their peers may have available to them. And, you know, this goes back to one of the sort of issues with defined benefit plans in general, is that your retirement benefit is based really more on your final salary at the end of your career rather than your history of career earnings over the course of your career. So that is one of those sort of theoretical areas where a cash balance plan, which is not used in very many states, but it's used in a few, that tends to result in a retirement benefit that's a little more representative of your career long earnings. Whereas in a DB system, your retirement benefit really is based on what did you earn in your last couple of years. And then the fourth one here, cap AFC at a certain income level and offer a DC with match to employees earning above that level. That speaks to this concept of a stacked defined benefit, defined contribution hybrid, where not many places have this. Philadelphia has it, where your defined benefit is based on up to a certain income level. So down there, it's at $65,000. So your AFC can go no higher than $65,000. And you're also not paying, you're only paying contributions on your first $65,000 worth of income. And then anything above that is put into a DC plan, a defined contribution plan with an employer match. So everybody below that $65,000 level basically has the same plan they had all along, but higher earners have their benefits capped at that $65,000 AFC.
I just want to comment on, Sarah, your example of someone making 70,000 versus 90,000. In all likelihood, the person making 90,000 at the time of retirement was making 90,000 for 10 years. They're presumably making something less than that, probably to the tune of about 3,000 a year. If you do a 3% on 90,000, it's $2,700. If they got a 3% increase, you know, you can take that back a few years. They weren't earning 90,000 and paying contributions on that for 10 years. It was probably only for 1 year. And something less than that the year before, and something less than that the year before.
Right, and depending on the length of time that's used to calculate someone's AFC, that can have either a minimal impact or a significant
Yeah,
impact.
it'd be 3 years or 2 years, depending upon if it's group F or group C.
Right.
So do we have any thoughts on this or?
I have a question. You mentioned some of the work that was done recently, specifically in regard to the troopers. So when did that occur? I'm just wondering if we sort of address this concern in relatively recent past.
I would say maybe 6 years ago. Do you remember, Mike? Okay.
The discussion started.
But we didn't address the number of years. We just addressed the overtime issue.
redress the oversight issue, which the language without the number.
Right,
We
right,
didn't change that to the number here.
right. Yep, right.
I think just any kind of DC or hybrid plan, I really don't want to explore. You know, I think that defined benefit is really, really important, sticking there. And the second piece, just in general, the average final compensation is not something I'm leaning towards adjusting. You know, it kind of reminds me of something Eric has said before, that this isn't a case of benefits being too generous. That's not the problem here. It's you know, the funding piece. So I'm not really in favor of exploring AFC personally.
Do we know what it would mean in terms of if we did it on a 5-year instead of a 3-year? That we have that someplace. Yeah.
Some analysis was done in the treasurer's report in January 15th. And I copied that into the slide deck I was referencing on, I think, August 17th.
Yeah.
But let me just rattle those numbers off real quick.
I think I'm gonna have to get a 3-ring binder and get a little
It
tab.
changed my life.
Yeah.
Okay, so the treasurer's office in her January 15th report modeled, so let's start with VSERS. If you added 2 years to the calculation for all groups, that lowers the accrued liability by 39.2 million and the ADAC by 6 million. If you added 4 years to all groups, that lowers the accrued liability by 81.5 million and the ADAC by 12.4 million. If you revise the AFC to apply the highest 5 consecutive years for all members, that lowers the accrued liability by 47.3 million, the ADAC by 7.3 million. And if you were to revise the AFC so it was 7 years for all groups, that would lower the liability by 89.3 and the ADAC by 13.6. The on the teacher side, increasing the AFC from 3 to 5 years for everybody would lower the accrued liability by 47.3 million and the ADAC by 6.7 million. And revising the AFC from the current 3 years to 7 years would lower the liability by 92.5 million and the ADAC by 13 million. And if you take a look at the slide on slide 6, you could see some other numbers that the House modeled with, and the key difference on that is, again, that carve out with active members who are within 5 years of current normal retirement eligibility were excluded. So the numbers change a little bit.
Anybody else have thoughts on that?
Well,
John?
there doesn't seem to be any, at least no one has articulated any kind of reason why, like, teachers have 3 hires and group D has final year. I mean, it seems that there should be some equity between the groups, especially with respect to D, for highly compensated judges seem to get the best benefit package. So I don't know. I think AFC is something we should look at with respect to equity between all the groups.
Anybody else have some thoughts on that? So for an individual person, I'm thinking, if you did it at 5 years for the individual person, does it make a huge impact on spread in averaging 5 years as opposed to 3? I mean,
So in the funds, it's not an insignificant impact on the funds. I
Right.
mean, it does move the needle on the liability and the
Right.
ADAC by several $1 million and would result in savings that are not inconsequential budgetarily.
Mhm.
I think it would really, how it impacts any given member really depends on a specific member's salary and employment history. Because you could just imagine how varied that experience could be.
And I believe we have run some of those numbers to see what the impact would be on different individuals, and we can provide that information.
Okay, great, that would be great, because I'd like to see that, because adding 2 more years in to average out I don't know how much of a difference that would make. If I look at my average salary from the last 3 years as opposed to the last 5 years, I'm not sure that there's a tremendous amount of difference.
I ran my numbers back in the winter. I'm looking for it right now, but I remember COLA had a larger effect.
Yep.
But it definitely had a recognizable effect. So I'll see if I can.
Okay, great.
Does anybody want to respond to the question of equity across the different groups?
It's interesting. It is hard to know without a historical context what that's about and what negotiations happen at different times to create that outcome. I don't know how that would inform our thinking about it. I feel like it might inform mine.
No, I was asking the question about John's
Making it
statement that there is a difference between having, you know, your final year versus having your final 2 years or 3 years.
Or final salary, yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember. I remember when the judges came in and I don't remember the arguments, but they do have a pretty substantial retirement package. It's not a percentage of their final salary. It's their final salary and it isn't an average of anything. It's
Yeah, they get final salary plus
100%.
100%.
Final salary. Yeah, I mean, if I were somebody who was getting a pension from the state of Vermont and I wasn't the judge, I'd be a little bit ripped about that one.
Yeah.
Well, I would say just in fairness to that, to become a judge, you do a lot of, I mean, it's an honor. I would think most lawyers want to be judges, and we want to create incentive for good lawyers to want to become good judges. I think that's, again, without knowing the history, I would assume that's part of the purpose of having it. If you commit yourself to this, then you will be compensated for that because it's going to take a long time. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of all of the things that go into becoming that, and you're going to be compensated for that. So I would say that that's certainly probably part of why the benefit is what it is without
Oh,
knowing
I'm
the
sure.
history. So,
Well,
sure.
I don't know. I mean, I think it's incredibly valuable, the career and effort of a kindergarten teacher.
Absolutely.
And for someone to have given 30 years of their life becoming the best kindergarten teacher they can be.
Mhm.
I don't want us to dismiss that simply because there aren't as many extra letters at the end of someone's name because they didn't, you know.
Okay, so then I guess my argument to that would be, why not bring the kindergarten teachers up instead of bringing the judges down? I mean, then if, I agree with you, I'm not a teacher, but my sister-in-law is, and I know what she's going through. So let's raise them up to where we think they should be. And things like that. That would be what I would say to that, and I disagree with you. Again, none of this table had any input as to why certain benefits are what they are. But you know, that's kind of where we are and what we're looking at. You know, I would just say, again, from the standpoint of this committee and what we're looking at, and from what I'm hearing is, you know, you know, the overall tone I'm getting from the people in the field is, I will pay some more, I will contribute more if what needs to be done, but please don't touch my benefits, because that's what I'm looking forward to. And it doesn't matter where they are in the system, please don't touch my benefits. So that's kind of where I would say with what we're doing.
Yeah.
And just a quick question. Is it possible, I think that was what Molly was asking, is it possible to look at the history of, because when you look at these charts, the group comparisons, there are a lot of different changes between the VSEA, between the teachers and stuff like that. And when we're talking about equitable, you know, across the line, Is there a way to look at the history of how we came to be, just briefly? Like have us,
I think it's a great question to ask, and I don't know who you would be able to find who would come in and speak frankly about it, because I have heard people say that the disparity between teachers and state employees is a reflection of sort of the fact that teachers way back when tended to be women and the state employees tended to be men. But I don't know don't know how to capture the thoughts that went into the creation of these systems that we may have just perpetuated over time. And to Dan's point about equalizing, like how the heck would we equalize between 100% of your final salary being your pension benefit versus, 50% of your last, 3 highest years or whatever. I don't know who would answer that. Does anybody in the know who would be able to talk about the?
I suspect that some contribution levels and some benefit levels were set way back when. And that then we've just gradually on those. So if the foundation, and it might have been at the time a reasonable amount, a reasonable foundation, but we've just been building on that instead of just changing, doing what we needed to do to either change that foundation or just keep building on it. But I don't know who would make Jim Spalding come in or Jim Douglas, maybe.
Jim Douglas.
We have good information going back to about 2000.
Yeah,
The problem is the pensions existed a lot
right.
earlier
They've
than
been in
that.
existence for a long
Right.
time now.
Well, and I think Sarah probably hit the nail on the head. It's the biases of the culture that created it, right? I mean, that has been my guess all along as well. It's a guess. It's hypothesizing from my studies class in 1985, but
Right, and probably the rationale that was used is that the woman is not going to be the primary breadwinner back in the 19 whatever's, whenever the system was created, and therefore the pension benefit doesn't have to be as rich because by golly, she's gonna have her husband to help her out.
riding in on the plate, of course.
But, I think we can all, we all understand that the way our families live now is very different than that traditional, man is the breadwinner kind of scenario that may have been more prevalent
Right, and
decades ago.
I suspect that there might also be some between, not looking at the judges or anything, but between the state employees and the teachers, that the state employees are a much more cohesive group, and that when the retirement systems plan started, they might have had much more negotiating authority and power up here, and the teachers who were spread at every community and probably didn't have as much organizational clout as the state of. I don't know that that's true, but I would suspect that might have contributed also.
So I don't know the history of that, but I believe when folks worked on this issue the last time, there were changes that allow, I think the state had 50% of CPI at 1.2. And there were changes made to essentially pay for that 100% CPI change. But I do not know the specifics of that at all. I wanted to really comment on the inequities. And I mean, I think it's clear if you look at the plans, there are inequities, particularly with group D, group F, and they, don't reflect progressivity in any way. But I have the same concern that I mentioned before, that you have an employee participating in the plan with an understanding of what their benefit structure is, and changing it for a current participant really does bring in some fairness and equity issues in itself. You know, if we want to sit down and design what an equitable structure looks like for new entrants across plans, I think that's a different conversation.
Yeah, can I get to, I found the spreadsheet that I was looking for. I had calculated it at, this is for the AFC.
Oh, yeah.
question. I had calculated a 3-year average and a 7-year average. I didn't do 5, and I was just trying to run the numbers and I'm messing up. But like at a 1.5% COLA, it's basically about a 2% difference in the amount that then gets projected over time. So, you know, at a 1.5% COLA, that differential 20 years is about $2,000 a year. If I did the math right, I can show Michael. It was an estimation, I think.
Okay, yeah, and you will get us those numbers. Thank you, Molly.
Yeah.
Will get us those
The
numbers.
impact on
and do
members'
rounds.
benefits based on an
Yeah.
increase in AFC.
Yeah, I would like to see that.
The final item on this month, there's no bullet points below it, but one other lever that can be pulled to reduce liabilities is to modify the service credit multiplier formula. So that's the 1.67% per year of service that people accrue. So obviously, modifying that in a downward direction reduces liabilities. Modifying it in an upward direction increases liabilities when all else is equal.
Any comments on that one?
I feel like everybody ate turkey for lunch.
I know. I think from now, I'm gonna serve coffee at lunch.
Sounds good.
Or maybe jalapeno peppers. Any comments on that one at all, or?
Same comment for the rest of the core piece of the benefit structure, AFC and retirement age for current employees. I think I did just pull up the teacher's chart, and we'll have to confirm this, but I think at one point, state employees may have agreed to increase their contributions in exchange for the full CPI. That's where that.
Oh, okay, that's, okay, got it. And I see some heads bobbing. And that was probably what was done, was it 2009 or 10, it was right in there, right?
Yeah, it might have been in between.
Okay.
I was not, I was not involved in the specific, but I've heard about that change and how it came about. But I can't speak to the specific.
Okay, thank you.
I think that also goes to the part of the, when we talk about the history, like there's been agreements on all of these different groups to get to where they are. Those groups said, yes, we will give this up if you give us this, or we, I mean, so, there's a lot of history in there that we, as a group, certainly don't understand or know about or anything like that. There's to get to where we are today and what we're looking at. So,
And to that point, I just make the observation that it appears to me that in conjunction with changes that have either modified benefits or increased contributions, there have also typically been sweeteners that have been added to it that have contributed to why we're in this hole that we're in right now. Like when you add a sweetener and you don't cost out exactly what that long-term impact is going to be, then you end up creating a bigger problem down the road.
sure.
And I would hope
Yeah,
that we
no, and
are
I-
all aware of that as
Yeah.
we think about the necessity to undo some of the things that have been done in the past in order to put this system on a sustainable path.
And I think that just for me personally, I think, like I said, for me, I don't know why the number 8% or so was chosen for Group C and 6% was chosen for, for other employees and the teachers, why I don't know what those. So if we're going to create a rate, I think we need to tie it to something that we can all go back and say, this is why. And people can look at that and understand this is why the rate is what it is. And this is how we came to that conclusion. And in the future, that rate is going to keep this sustainable because, let's be honest, we all don't want to be here in 5 years to say, well, we thought 9% was good, but we were, maybe we need 10%. I think that for me is the part where if we take time and really do our due diligence with parts of this, we can see where it takes us in years and see where that really puts us and see if we got, where we are with it.
So where are we right now? We're in room 11. It's 2:00.
That is true.
I think it's possible that we may have run out of our ability to drill into this at this point. Anyone want to dive in on service credit multiplier formulas right now, or shall we just tap out here and shift gears?
Okay. I think that was the answer.
All right, I think that what makes sense right now, since we have the treasurer at 3:00 and a quick introduction with Vice Miller at 3:30, it probably makes sense for us to take agenda setting up right now. But do folks want to talk about anything else with we didn't go back to the beginning.
We're gonna look
We
at the
agreed.
green.
Yeah,
I just
Yeah,
want to make
okay.
sure that what I reflected here is really where we were on these, so that the green language, is the green language correct? Is not whether we agree with it or not, but is it
Is it an accurate reflection of what we talked about?
that is exactly what I was trying to say. Had more tricky than most. Okay, so on the first one, there seemed to be unanimous support. We need more information about how it would actually work. And also think that we need to think about a separate method for OPEB. Is that where we landed with the amortization?
And one of the notes I had in my paper is Eric talking about the tiered approach to amortization. I don't know.
That's what, no, I said,
Layered.
yeah, layered
Layered or tiered.
or is the same as
Got it.
tiered.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. That's what. So was there indeed some unanimous support around that concept, but that we need more information on the details? Okay, so that was an accurate reflection. And then on the risk sharing, it seemed to be more closely connected to the reduced liabilities category, and we'll discuss it then. And we did do some of that today with the COLAs. New plans for new hires, there was limited support, open to more information on the advantages and disadvantages, what it would actually do. I think there was some concern about equity and recruitment, and we needed more information. But there was limited support. Is that
Correct.
the way I read the
There
room?
may be some also limited not support, like I wrote not consensus on those.
Right, so there was limited support, meaning there was also unsupport.
But I think that when we were talking about some of the aspects of the
Mhm.
reducing liabilities category today, I think we did identify a couple places where folks were suggesting that that they would support that, a change in those aspects for new hires. So I think,
Yeah.
as a general category, it's we're on mixed right now.
And the education fund is, there seemed to be some support, but we needed more information about what exactly would be transferred to the ed and the impact that would have. Is that an accurate reflection of where we were?
Let's dig in on that. Is so some support, is there support for pieces of it? You know, the consensus for a certain element.
So some support, for the totality. I'm just wondering if there might be consensus for pieces of it. And I don't know what the answer to that is. I'm just throwing that out there.
Well, I guess there are the three different sections and kind of the OPEB. Should the pension and OPEB costs be reflected in local school budgets? And should the education fund pay for any growth in Beaster's unfunded liability above the current levels? Those were the three ideas that we talked about. I don't know. I don't think we separated them, but we can.
I almost feel like this is peripheral to the core mandate of
It
the
is.
task force, because
It
this is sort of making a recommendation about who should bear the costs, as opposed to the directive of the task force is to reduce the unfunded liabilities in the pension system.
Right.
I mean, we could make a fairness argument about whether it should be the ed fund or the general fund, but at the end of the day, our directive is to reduce liabilities.
And so this might be more appropriate to give to the finance and ways and means committees and have them look at how that would shake out.
Yeah, if I may, Madam Chair, one thing specific to the OPEB costs that I do think kind of falls within the purview of this task force is the ed fund, the legislators at the legislature, the end of last session during the budget process reserved $14 million in the ed fund. And that money is reserved pending a recommendation from this task force on what to do with that money, quite frankly, and how to perhaps fund OPEB costs going forward. So when we parse out that first question there, some are all of the teacher OPEB costs. I think kind of a clean way to differentiate what is some and what is all is some could be the normal cost of the benefit, all could be the total, the normal cost and the unfunded liability. Currently everything, the state share of everything falls out of the general fund, but on the OPEB side, but on the pension side, the normal cost is out of the ed fund. So the rationale behind that is the normal cost really is a cost to provide today's workforce with a benefit in the future. So that's what you need to set aside over the course of somebody's career. Make sure there's going to be enough money in the trust fund to pay for those benefits when they retire. So that I think is what some of the committees are hoping to get some guidance on is, does it make sense, or does the group feel it's appropriate for some or all of those costs, the normal cost or the unfunded liability, to go into the ed fund?
And that would certainly affect the pressures on the general fund.
And on the ed fund.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I think we eliminated the next line. But I didn't eliminate it because I wanted to make sure that we all agreed that we take that out. Okay. Oh, and I can't even read this one. Oh, yes, there was a fair amount of support, I think, but we needed more definition of what minimal meant, what the actual changes would be, and what a certain number of years meant. And that but we did agree, I believe, that any changes would not affect those who are currently eligible but have chosen to continue to work. Is that? Okay?
You said there were two categories, the close to retirement and the could retire now but are still working. That's what I wrote here. Those were really two separate categories.
Right, so the changes would not affect those people who are currently eligible but are choosing.
I don't know that we decided, we just identified that there were
Oh.
two different groups. That's
Oh.
what I took away from it.
Oh, okay, I thought that we had agreed on that, but
Maybe
we
so.
could.
I don't know. My notes were a little skeletal.
Yeah, I looking at my notes, it doesn't look like we agreed to it, but Michael had pointed out to keep in mind that distinction.
Okay. Okay. Got it. Okay.
I could just add that the point being is that it's likely that if there were changes that are going to impact people who are currently eligible to retire but are not yet retired, in more likelihood, most of those would probably just walk out the door before
Right.
the changes took place.
Yeah.
And then you're losing all that institutional knowledge and all the associated benefits currently, because they're actually gains to the system right now.
And then we talked about one-time funds. And I think Peter said, if I remember, that currently they've said that any 50% of any surplus will go to OPEB for state employees. Did I get that right? And that we need to define the amount above the ADEC if we want to put a one-time fund in. And there's currently $150 million set aside for something, but we need to determine where best to put it. And if there is an amount beyond that and how to apply that. Is that? And I will remind us that the statute says that the $150 million will be used for this purpose if we come up with structural changes that make the system sustainable. If we can't come up with changes that make the system sustainable, that 150 million is free to go wherever the appropriations committees want to put it.
And I just thought of something. Do you know how that definition of sustainable fits with the other part of the statute, which says between 25 and 100%?
Yep, that's exactly where it has to be.
As long as it's even within that range, it's considered sustainable.
If we meet our goal of coming up with what is in, because the statute for the 150 is in a different statute. It isn't in the act, whatever it is that we're addressing. That's in the budget itself. So, yeah,
So as long as it's in that range somewhere.
As long
that
as-
would fit the, okay.
that's the way I understand it. Is that,
I just don't want to go
Yeah.
for 39% and find out they actually meant 100. You know what I'm saying?
yeah, I get it. And then the ongoing. I don't know if that was what we did agreed on or not. But we do know that over the past years, the payment has been over the ADEC amount. It has been,
which has not caused our unfunded liability to
Right.
stop growing.
right, right.
I'm sorry, can I go back to one thing I
Sure.
just had thought? With the one-time infusion, my notes talked about the amount over the ADEC, but I also had that divided into two categories, one being pandemic surpluses and the other being the, like, ADEC, above ADEC amounts. Did anybody else have that reflected in this?
I think that you mean that the 50% of it would go to the,
I think it was capturing that we're in this unique moment historically where we have these excesses, pandemic monies coming in that could be offset.
well, I think that's where the 200 million surplus came from.
Okay, so it's just looking at all in the same thing together. And
Yeah.
I was just differentiating. Okay.
Yeah. But that's what I think is that the surplus was caused by an infusion of federal money into the state that helped create a surplus.
I guess, Jeanette, I'm just reading what you have
Yep.
down there, and just trying to make sure my understanding of it is accurate. There's currently the 150 million, which the task force needs to make recommendations on. And then I think there's a question of whether that is whether that's the right amount, or whether there should be contributions beyond. You know, it says, and if there is an amount beyond that, how to apply it. So is that fair? Is that, you know, how should we allocate the 150, and is there an opportunity to use additional one-time funds?
Yeah, I think that was the question here. Is there a one-time fund, one-time infusion is, we know there's 150, but is that the right amount, or is it 200 or whatever? And we need to make that recommendation then. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thanks.
Yeah. And then the ongoing or recurring infusion? So I think we need to figure out if the legislature has been overfund or over budgeting the ADAC, whatever the ADAC was, they've been putting in more. And are we going to recommend even more beyond, or a certain amount beyond the ADAC? And but remembering that we can bind the current legislature, but we can't bind anybody beyond that. So even if we said there should be recurring, every year we should put in 200 million above the ADAC, that they don't have to pay any attention to us in the next session.
One thing we need to remember is that if we go down the path of, we haven't talked a lot about OPEB, which concerns me, that we have not talked a lot about OPEB, is that if we do go down the pre-funding route, we're also going to have an amount that we have to pay for OPEB beyond what the pay bill amount that we're currently paying. And so I think that we need to take that into consideration. With respect to adding even more money than we're currently committing the pensions.
I could add, the treasurer did come in earlier, one of our earlier meetings, and do a presentation on OPEB, including some scenarios for additional funds. Are you looking for something more than that?
Well, we talked about last week about putting together a memo on OPEB and health savings.
Yeah, she has some additional ideas, which talk about, she can address where she's at with that when she comes at 3 o'clock, but
Great.
I just want to point out, we did have a fairly detailed presentation by, I believe, Chris and the treasurer on OPEBs earlier on.
We've had a presentation, but I don't think there's been much discussion at the task force about solutions we may want to look at. I mean, unlike what we have spent the last couple of meetings on with respect to pensions, where we've had a very good discussion, I think. But the
Perhaps
various
a start-
options that are available, we really haven't had that with
Discussion.
respect to OPEB at all.
So perhaps the starting point would be to take that memo up from the treasurer as a presentation, the starting point,
Right.
and maybe go from there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we need to get that on a future agenda.
And I agree with that. Thanks for bringing that up, John, because I actually had that on my list to add on to the reduced liabilities portion, and all the turkey at lunch. I forgot to bring it up. But that is the biggest lever to reduce overall liabilities. You know, 1.6, 1.7 billion dollars across both systems. So it does require a commitment of money. But if we're concerned with the overall level of liabilities, that's a huge lever to pull. And on this amount over the ADEC, Sarah, you raise a good point that this has been a practice and it hasn't seemingly made a difference. But where you are in the amortization schedule does matter too, and where at the point where each payment should be paying down the unfunded liability. So adding additional payments now, would have a greater impact. I guess I wonder, folks, having seen that the modeling work from the actuary, where people kind of are on where they'd include that into our work here. Because I found the modeling on recurring revenue fairly, and not taking up, not taking a position on where it comes from, but just the concept. I guess that's a question for the task force.
Yeah, I think we looked at that one.
I think going back, I know Chris gave us the run through last week of the presentation from the actuaries, which is great, but I think we'll be good to circle back to, as we continue these discussions, we have some pieces to work with there.
Okay. Can we move to employee contributions and see if that reflects what we did? I think there was no agreement on the first one. Am I right about that? On the fixed amount, regardless of the health of the funds. But there was, I thought, some general agreement about the tiering of the rates, as long as we come up with a base that is understandable and explainable and figure out where the tiers are. Was that, did I reflect that right? Yeah.
And I think there's also the discussion about not doing it all at once, but over a period of time, as well as discussion about possibly tying it to the health of the fund.
Thanks. And so it's not risk sharing. I must have had turkey when I wrote this.
Jeanette, can I just ask you, with that, when you say tiered, I just want to make sure I'm understanding, is that tiered in the sense of if Group C eventually is going to get to, let's say, 10.5% over the next X number of years, it will go up in these increments?
Well, I think that it's a combination of both the municipal plan that we were given. I think that the way I understood it was that on the people at this salary range would pay this percent, and that this salary range would pay a slightly different percentage, and then higher. So it's tiered by your income, but then there's a plan that to go forward, that it would be incrementally increased for each of those tiers. That's the way the muni, the Beamers did it. We had that.
Well, no, if I understood correctly, they did it
Okay.
to a fixed amount, correct? Not to we wanted to get to 10.5%. So over the next X number of years, we're going to increase your contribution to get to this rate. They create a tier that just wanted to get.
But
to a
I thought it
different
was
rate.
connected to the amount of salary you were making.
It was. That's
It
the
was, it
discussion we
is.
had last week. was
Yeah.
So that not everyone's paying the same contribution amount, because obviously people who have a lower salary are going to be more challenged by increased contribution. So therefore, if we had a tiered or a progressive approach, the people who have the highest salary would be.
No, Beamer doesn't base what you pay based on what you make. They did increase over a year. We've talked about.
We're not talking about Beamer. We're talking
I know,
about.
but she-
I did bring that up, but they had different groups. They had group A, B, and C, and D, which I assume are not tied to.
Those are chosen by select boards.
Yeah,
And I remembered one thing differently. I thought we were saying that, and maybe I'm just misinterpreting how you just communicated that, but that say there's a certain tier to a certain level of income, that everyone's income to that level would be, the contribution would be that rate to that level. And then it's income above that tier
Yeah,
that gets a
yeah.
higher rate and above that tier that gets a higher rate.
Yeah, like income taxes.
Right,
figured.
exactly.
So that your effective rate is nowhere near what that top tier is.
Right.
Because it's a blend.
Yeah,
Right.
that's what I thought too.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, as long as we're talking the same one.
So we're really talking about a progressive contribution rate.
Yeah.
Much like we talk about a progressive income tax.
Yeah.
Did I get that wrong?
No.
Or,
I think you're right. I think they're two separate questions. So, if you create this
Mhm.
progressive system, Andrew's comment, I think, was maybe you make adjustments to that. So you create it and everyone goes up by a little bit, or maybe the lower tier stays the same and everyone goes up by a little bit. And then the next year, there's another adjustment and another adjustment to get to where you have wanted it designed.
oh, instead of imposing the tier right away, but okay.
I guess I see it as two different, I see it as two different
A
things, right? You
phase-in.
have a tiered system, or we can say, based on our calculations, we believe Group D should be contributing this percentage, and over the next X number of years, they will contribute these increments to get to that percentage. I think it's two separate systems. One's going to be, we're going to end up getting to a defined contribution rate at some point in time, or this tiered system. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does, and that makes,
So that's what I was
makes
trying
some
to
sense with-
differentiate between what you were saying. and
yeah,
what's
I
here,
think
so.
that makes some sense for the group D. Because they all get paid the same amount, right? A judge gets paid a judge's salary, I believe. We passed that in the paper. That's, and the progressive years make much more sense to me for particularly group F, because there the range of salaries is so big that the progressive tiers make more sense to me there. And so you could apply it to everybody, but it's not going to have any impact on like on group D. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I was trying, when you say,
Yeah.
so I just want to make sure I understood when you said tiered contribution,
Yeah.
what those differences were.
Should have said
and-
progressive.
Oh, yeah, Dan's point, they're two separate things. I mean, honestly, from my perspective, if we're gonna ask the employees and teachers to pay X more as part of new revenue, but they do it through a tier system or slowly ramp up whatever it pays, it's made a motto to me as long as it gets to the dollar amount. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's a place where, like, if we agree to the dollar amount, folks kind of figure out what you think you'd rather do with your membership.
How you get there, right?
Right.
And how we get there.
Because I don't think, yeah, I think it's.
So are you saying that we should not look at progressive tiered system?
I think it makes sense. I also think it just makes sense that people pay in. I think it's harder to design something that's both progressive and tiered so that like everyone going up a quarter point a year, but those that this are getting this other, like how complex is it going to get? I think if our goal, I'm just throwing up, there's 50 million in revenue and we want the employees by year 4 to be paying half of that or whatever percentage of that. How do you get there over those 4 years? To me, doesn't matter how we get there, the financial dollars get there. I never looked at there on that, but I think both are options on trying to come up with that piece.
Maybe we should ask the treasurer's office too, how the complexity of administering.
Yeah, I think there could be like a surcharge where everybody goes up a few points and maybe we'll wait over 100,000 pay additional 1% or something, but that's a different.
All right. So skip down to the school surplus funds. I'm not sure that that's something that, as we heard, the school budgets are not designed to have surpluses. So I'm not sure that how much time we want to put into that. And then the state budget surpluses. And I think that Peter Reagan said they already are doing it, right?
Well, that's the 50/50.
Right, 50 into the, day and 50 into the.
Yeah, I mean, this gets into another one of those situations where, the question is, how did it get that way? My understanding is that at one point in time, there was additional money put in the teacher's OPEB, and the way to kind of balance that out was to say at a later point in time, there'll be some money put into the state employees OPEB. But, at this point in time, I think it does make sense to direct that to the unfunded.
Anybody else? Property sales? I think we decided not to go there, didn't we? Yeah. And solicit ideas from employees. I think Sarah's little representation here with the pot, trying to put the money into it, was we should always encourage people to come up with ideas of how to save money, but how you put it into that pot is a little complicated. Yeah. So it is.
But there might be a way to tie that one into the redirect some portion of school surplus position. There may be a way to sort of educate people about that if we implement the school surplus piece.
And we could also educate state employees.
Yeah,
that if
yeah.
the more you can save, the more likely you are that there is likely to be expendable money that can go into the pension system.
Yeah, I think that the dollars, that's not gonna be the biggest lever, but creating that kind of awareness about, about the system, I think really,
I think you're right. All right.
That brings us through the green notes, and I assume you'll create some more green notes for next time based on. what
I
we
will
just talked
try.
about.
I will try. My notes for this time are a little bit even more scattered, but I will try. And if anybody else wants to take a crack at this too, you're welcome to.
if I could just suggest that we do add OPEB, pre-funding OPEB to the reduced liabilities.
Yeah, okay.
So we keep that, and give a discussion for that. Keep that, in our focus.
And I also added the thing about the Colorado.
Thank you.
So can we shift gears to talk about agenda planning for next time? Does that sound like a good idea? Super. So I feel like we've been through a lot of the different options here now a couple of times in terms of what we understand people are interested in pursuing. And the next level of vetting that we need to do about these ideas really needs to be done to put more precision around what combinations of changes we might want to look at, so that when we ask the actuary to do the scenarios, we have a realistic set of scenarios. And so what I was going to suggest for next time, and I had asked Michael if there was perhaps an extra person we could tap to join us for the morning part of the meeting, is that if we sat down and did some vetting for the teacher system, the troopers system, and the rest of the state employee system, that we might be able to come up with some more accurate combinations of scenarios, as opposed to sitting around the table doing this in this cumbersome way where, where we've got 3 teachers who don't really have a stake in the state employee system, and likewise. So if we had the ability to do that, break into subgroups from 9 to noon at the next meeting, and really see if we can come up with some more specificity around the scenarios we want to run. Does that make sense?
I just have a question. Do we think the differences across the system are, I'm trying to balance the having, different perspectives at the table versus the specifics of the system, I guess. Also seems like combining those differently across the systems might not work out that well. I'm kind of wondering if it's best to take it as a full group.
I agree. Well, I will point out again that we don't have a meeting the week of the 26th, 27th. And that we do have a pretty tight timeline for getting scenarios developed for the actuary. And it has taken us 3 meetings just to go through and talk about all of the possible changes, possible options. And if we are going to then go back through as an entire group of 13 and try to put together what scenarios might be appealing or acceptable to teachers versus state employees, I think that that's going to take us it's going to take us more time than we have. And I honestly, I think that teachers who are sitting on this task force know what their fellow teachers think is important, and can maybe lean more heavily on one benefit change versus another, because that's what's important to them. And likewise with the troopers and state employees.
How would the legislative members be allocated amongst these work groups?
2, 2, and 1, I think, because there's only 5 of us.
So are you thinking, Eric, that we should be thinking about, I haven't thought about this before, thinking about this more equitable, I mean, that we should be looking at this so that we're looking at people having the same level of benefits and the same level of contributions, whether they're a teacher or a state employee or a trooper, and instead of dividing up by.
This is we're starting in the different.
I know they
Plans
are
are so
different.
very different.
Yeah, yeah, so
Not really. I was just wondering about the efficiencies that would be gained if 2 groups are doing the same thing at the same time, versus having additional perspectives at the table, at the whole table, where the trade-off is there.
Well, can we report back to the whole group and talk about what each of the subgroups have come up with, and invite questions and perspectives at that point?
anybody, do other people have thoughts about this approach or a better approach or how we would? Sarah is right. We do have one meeting, the 22nd, and then we don't have a meeting again until October 6th, I think it is. And we have to have our interim report ready by the 13th. And our interim report is a progress report. So we don't have to have come up with decisions, but we really should by the end of our next meeting have enough concrete information that we can give to the actuaries. That, I mean, I think that's the goal, the timing here is we have to, if we don't come up with those scenarios until, and by the way, I hate that word, but if we don't come up with those until October 20th, we're going to be way behind it.
And Jeanette, I
Yeah.
think it's important that people understand that when you say scenarios, I mean, you could actuarial model all these different things we've talked about, like cost of living, AFC, all separate and apart. But as we've learned, as you bring those together into a scenario, the impact on the pensions can change. So I think it is important that we look and have the actuaries do scenarios of what is a likely outcome of a recommendation by the task force.
Right.
In the whole, or we may not have the right information we need to ultimately make a recommendation.
And I think that goes to both Dan and Eric's point that there were trade-offs before. We'll do this if we can do this, and so those are the kinds of things that we need to come up with, those packages. And that I think is where you're thinking that it might be different. What the troopers are saying, we'll go here with this if we can go here with this, might be different than what the teachers are willing to. Theirs might be completely opposite. I think that's where you're thinking, right? Is that we need to have the buy-in from the group that each of us represent. Go ahead.
Yeah, but
Oh,
I mean, I think we're developing scenarios for the actuary to run, not making a final decision on the merits of changing this versus that. So, I just wonder where the right balance is between having more perspectives at the table versus having less.
I'm wondering about some of those teacher protocol things we were talking about a month or two ago, where, like, is there a way, it feels like we have a lot of information in these 4-inch stacks that we all have, and that some of what we need to do is just tell people, certain people, to dive into that stack or dive into that stack and retrieve what we're looking for. So it's almost like I'm envisioning something where we need to create a list of what we have to retrieve, and then we have to piece together pieces of that to create different scenarios. And some of that will need to run through actuaries. Is that how, I mean, do you guys agree that some of, like, at least for me, in my mind, I've got a lot swimming around of different possibilities, but I have yet to sit down and say, okay, if we do this with one-time revenue and we do this with ongoing revenue, that still leaves a hole of this. And what are my options to get that through contributions, say? That's how I envision doing it. But I have so much information that it's not extracted down to the pieces I want to work with yet. So do we have to identify what those pieces are? That's kind of what we've been doing here, but the numbers are in here.
And we don't, and none of the numbers that we may have in our 4-inch stacks line up with the combinations, the scenarios that the treasurer ran and that the speaker's house plan ran were reliant on different levers moving
Yep.
than what we've talked about here. And so we need to understand, you know, from the perspective of the folks who are sitting at this table, what do you want to see? You want to see tested out.
Right, not to mention the fact that it's not the end of October yet, and we don't have the actual up-to-date numbers, which is gonna throw another wrench in it as we get a little further down the road.
It's a little,
That's a little tiny.
Maybe,
it's a little.
maybe.
You know, one of those like you use on your glasses. Yeah.
One of those little screwdrivers with the red lid.
So, okay. I understand what Sarah's saying about, you know, I understand what she's saying about that. I understand it there. But when we started this process, we were looking at, like, when you look at this January, the treasurer's report from January, it was talking about the combined, you know, the Vermont State Teachers Retirement System and the state employees retirement system, saying we needed this much money and the ADAC reduced by this much and blah, 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 going from whatever percentage to 100%, right? So when we're dividing and saying, okay, you guys, the teachers will look at this, the state employees will look at this, at your whatever for actuarial runs. But really, it's not a division unless we're saying, okay, are we having the VSERS take this percentage of the unfunded liability and this takes this part of the ADAC or whatever? I'm just saying, it seems as a whole, when we first entered the process, it was, this is what we have. The 474 million and reduce the ADAC by 85 million as a whole for the system. Right? So I'm just slightly confused why we would separate when we're trying to come together to get these totals.
Well, because we have two different funds and they each have different levels of unfunded liability. And they each have different benefit structures that contribute to those liabilities. And in fact, they each have different employee contribution rates that put money into that, into those two different systems. And, you know, I'm just gonna lay this out on the table. I thought that this would be a way of gaining the efficiency of being able to sit down and do, as Molly said, like, let's extract some numbers out of the data that we do have, see what combinations we might want to look at for scenarios with the actuary. And, you know, if we do it all here as a large group, I just think that that's a really inefficient use of our time, because while, yes, we would like to benefit from each other's wisdom and maybe a new or fresh idea from somebody who's not a part of your particular employee group. Fact of the matter is, we can do that by coming back together afterward and sharing what we have looked at and what we're planning out. And I don't see any other way that we can get reasonable scenarios to the actuary in time to give us the time we need to then look at a second round of scenarios in order to really refine what we're going to ask for. And, you know, we have an opportunity in front of us. We have $150 million that is sitting on the table waiting for this fix. We also have the ability to make a case for some other one-time revenue to be put into fixing this problem. And if we run the clock out because we needed to sit as a group of 13 and run through each and every possible changes to the structure of the teacher system and then the state employee system, we're going to run out of time. And, you know, I think that would be really unfortunate.
I just want to add one thing there. We are in a unique opportunity because of the amount of federal money that's coming into the state to really solve this problem. We can argue from here to eternity about how big the problem is, but this is a unique opportunity because of the federal funding that's involved to really make progress on solving the unfunded liabilities with respect to the pensions. If we lose that opportunity this year, I don't see where we're going to have another opportunity like this one to put significant one-time money at the issue.
So I'm gonna jump in here because I hadn't thought about this too much about the way we would do this, but the more I think about it, the more it makes sense to me that we do we divide it by the way the funds are. Because what I heard Molly say was that when the report first came out, among teachers, the biggest issue was having to work longer. And one of the things I heard, and I'm not sure this is true, but, because Dan didn't say it, but one of the things that I heard about from troopers, that I heard from troopers, was the cutting the COLA off at a certain level. That was a huge issue. So each constituency here has a different no start, no support. And I think that we need to make sure that we're addressing those, because when we go back, you have to sell it to the state employees and to the teachers and to the troopers, and we have to sell it to the 100 and however many other legislators there are. And we're gonna have to sell to the governor. So we each have our constituencies here, and so getting those plans that our constituencies are going to be the most likely to buy for themselves seems to me really important. I don't know if I said that very well, but it does seem to me that's, because we could come up with something that is going to fly right through with the teachers, but the state employees are going to say, never, we won't accept those terms. So that's my thinking now about splitting up. Maybe we don't take the whole 3 hours. Maybe we take an hour and a half and see how we're doing, and then come back to the larger group and share the results and get that other people's good thoughts. Anyway, that's just a thought. Yeah.
I think for me, just personally moving forward, I think it's important as however we decide if we break up or don't break up or whatever. I think for me to move forward, I think as a committee, we need to maybe set on a certain percentage, right? Because our charge is anywhere from 25 to 100%. That's a huge range. I mean, maybe we as a committee need to say, okay, we want to hit 50%, or at least come up with a number. So we now know this is the number we're working towards. How are we going to get to that number? One-time funds, maybe some contributions, some things like that. Without knowing the target, it's really not, it's uncertain of how we're going to get there and how, what levers we got to pull to get there. So maybe that's the first thing we do as a group is say, okay, this is 100% is this number and 25% is this number. What number do we all, what is a good number for us to try to hit, or whatever that might be, or try to hit certain numbers in the next certain amount of years. That just seems to me where we start, because then that at least gives us a point of the direction we need to head it. And maybe I'm off base on that, but that's kind of where I'm thinking.
I was wondering that same thing about 5 minutes ago. I was like, what's the X here that we're solving for? And then I just sort of let myself sit with that discomfort of not having a number yet. And I actually kind of like it better not knowing exactly, because I think that when we get into it and start looking at it, it may come back to the principles and the values we've identified, those first principles. We might revisit those and say, well, gosh, we could get 75% this year, but we'll be nixing half of our principles. Or, we can get to 50% this year and still pretty much maintain the integrity of what we're setting out to do. What could we do the following? So I kind of went full circle on that, and I might come back to wanting a target. But I think if we set a target, we should keep it kind of loose, remembering that we have these principles guiding us. I'm very comfortable with gray areas, just so you know. That is my bias. I'm not a black and white thinker.
Are these the targets in this, Chris, did you gave us that 25 to 100 target?
Yeah, that's what that legal jargon translates to your number.
Okay. So that's just for 25 and 100, right?
Yes.
Okay.
That's sort of the minimum and maximum.
Yeah.
Have a couple of things related and slightly not related. One, just looking at the time, I know we have Treasurer Pierce at 3. We haven't had a bio break, which would be great if we could get that in before the presentation. Thinking about other agenda items, some things that I had noted. One, I think this time said we were going to talk about public hearing details and iron that out. So we need to definitely get that on next time. I also wanted to just kind of at some point again review the charges of Act 75 to make sure there isn't something that we've missed that we're supposed to explore. Make sure we've kind of looked at some of those things there. I also, it was my understanding last time, I thought that the treasurer's office was also providing data to us about the impact of the underfunding on the boosters problem that would be this week. I'm not sure if that's something that Beth is speaking about today or not.
We can have her address that when she comes up, and let us know the status of that, where that product is.
Fantastic. And I'm excited to hear all of that, but also would like to still stress, I heard Chris say last time that the impact isn't huge, but it's very complicated. And, we've discussed before sending it to Siegel. And I know that Molly put in a request to the committee in an email to explore that, sent to Siegel, including the impact of the money coming out of 150 million going towards OPEB. So I would really like us to, if we can get that sent out, if we have to go through JFO today, so that way we can start to get that work done. I think that would be fantastic. The analysis of the underfunding from 1979.
That's what Michael Foster was mentioning, that the treasury box has that.
Right, yeah,
I don't believe JFO put in a request for that.
right, and that's what we've, and that's what we've been saying, is we're looking forward to seeing that information. But I'm still a little unclear on why it's not going to Siegel, because I thought we had agreed that it was going to Siegel previously.
Yeah, I think what the treasurer's office treasurer, she can speak to this when she comes up, but she has been working with it, and we're in contact with Siegel regarding the analysis that she was conducting. Release information at some point.
And I think the other thing, what I was hearing and talking about when you asked specifically what you were talking about was the OPEB portion that was coming out to 2014 in addition to the other.
The impact of the underfunding.
And the impact of using some of the ADEC money toward the OPEB until 2014 or 15.
That's in the analysis.
What the impact to the ADAP was.
Exactly.
Pulling it out of the box.
Madam Chair, suggesting that we just take a 5-minute break and then have the treasurer come up as opposed to talking around the treasurer. as she's
I
sitting
think
right
that
now.
we should do that. And
What
we,
time does you folks want?
no, well, we have a hard stop at 3:30 because at 3:30, our attorneys will be joining us and they will start billing us at 3:30.
How about a 5-minute break?